We made a video on India versus emerging economies a few weeks back, comparing India with countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. And a lot of you pointed out something interesting, that this felt like comparing apples with oranges, and that India is a much larger, more complex country, and that we should be comparing it with China instead, which is a fair ask. So then we compared India with China in another video, and some of you then said again that this comparison is unfair because China is not a democracy and it has a completely different political system. It can take decisions faster and execute faster. And that's also fair. So now the question is, if comparing with smaller countries is unfair and comparing with China is also unfair, then what is the right comparison? Let's take a step back for a minute, because maybe the point is to not who we compare with, maybe the point is why we compare at all. The purpose of this channel is not to prove that India is ahead or behind someone. It is to understand something much more important: how economies actually grow, what makes some countries move faster, and what it really takes to convert potential into prosperity. Because here's the truth: India today is already one of the largest economies in the world. We are in the top 6. We will likely become the top 3 in a few years. Just a matter of time, right? But that part is almost certain. But there is another number that tells a very different story: how much the average Indian earns. And on that front, where do we stand? And that gap is not about size, it is about how effectively an economy uses its people. Which brings us to today's topic: not comparisons, but something far more fundamental: India's demographic dividend. India is often called the youngest major economy in the world. We have one of the largest working population in human history, and that is supposed to be our biggest advantage, right? But there is one detail that is usually ignored. This advantage does not last forever. Every country gets this phase once, a period where most of its population is working, earning, building, and then slowly that population starts aging. India entered this phase of demographic dividend in the early 2000s, which means we are not at the beginning of this opportunity currently. We are already somewhere in the middle of it, and that changes how we should think about growth going forward. Because now it is not just about growth, it is about time. In the 1980s, India and China were not very far apart from each other in terms of economic output, but over the next 30 to 40 years, something very different has happened. China did not just grow, it has scaled. It moved millions of people into productive jobs, it built factories before the demand itself came. It invested heavily in infrastructure, logistics, and manufacturing. And most importantly, it increased output per worker. Which is why today, even though India has a similar population advantage like China, the average Chinese worker produces far more than the average Indian worker and earns far more than us. And that is the real gap, not population but productivity. And this is where the story becomes important, because demographics give you a window, but they don't guarantee an outcome. If enough people are working, if they are doing the right kind of work, and if each person is becoming more productive, then a country becomes rich. If not, the same population becomes a missed opportunity. And that is the question we are trying to answer in this video. India has the scale, India has the people, India has the window. The only question is what we do with it before the window closes. Hello and welcome back to Angel One Economics, everyone. My name is Utsari, and today we will finally put an end to the population debate of India. And we will do that in 3 checklists on the following things. First is labor. Are enough people working in the right kind of jobs? Then is education. Does a higher education mean higher employability? Then is innovation. Does the economy fuel more ideas and vice versa? Then we will see how rich can India get before our time runs out. Look at this left pyramid. That was India in 2011. Wider base, meaning more young people. Now look at the right one. That's where India is headed by 2051, with a bulge from 30 to 60 years of age population and a much shrinking base and top. Now, the population of the base till the time we start earning until 18 years, and the senior population, which is beyond 65 years, is the dependent population. And this dependent population keeps increasing as people have lesser babies and grow older. And in the middle sits the economy, which actually works, earns money, pays taxes, saves, and also carries the expenses of the dependent population. Now, this middle demography gives us the dividend while it can. More youth, more workforce, more innovation, more ideas, more consumption, more investments, more savings, and more growth. Right? Now, it is supposed to be an easy formula, but sadly, growth is never this linear. And hence, we should understand India's current window. See, India has 1.46 billion people, out of which the working population from 15 to 64 years is at 68%. Our median age stands at 28 years, and in the next 10 years, it is supposed to be 33 years, which means as of now, half of our population is above 28 and other half is below it. But within 10 years, that number shifts up, meaning the window to choose the youth bulge is actually now. And to give you some perspective, China's median age is at 40 years, USA's is at 38, Japan's is at 49, and Germany's is at 45. When Japan's demographic dividend window closed, it was already a rich nation. When China's window closed, it was an upper middle income nation. Meanwhile, India wants to achieve a rich country status by 2047 at $18,000 per capita. And for that to happen, we need a growth of 25 times from the start of the window. Currently, we are at a growth of 2.8 times only. It needs to be a 25 times growth in the next 21 years. And it is happening. Even the IMF has raised India's growth rate to 6.5% for FY26 to 27, surpassing China and US. So we are getting there. But first, we need to check if we are using the human capital to our full capacity. Because a large workforce creates growth only when three things come together. People must be working, they must be prepared for the right work, and they must be also productive. So let's see the employment specs. Out of the total 68%, which is 15 to 64 eligible to work, out of that, not everyone takes part in the labor force, right? And the labor force participation rate stands at 55%. Out of the total people who are part of the labor force, not everyone is employed, and our employment rate stands at 53%, which means that if our population is 100, 68 of them are eligible to work. Within them, 55 people would actively work or find work. And within them, 53 people would actually be employed. And other large nations like China is around 70%, Japan is around 65%, and US at 62%. Clearly meaning that more population in these nations are looking for work or are working. And we need to get there. Our employment rate is between 4 to 5%, which is, by the way, the lowest of all times. It is. And in fact, lower than China's too. But here are two shockers. 83% of the unemployed workforce are young people from 15 to 34 years of age, which means that most of the unemployed people are people with so much potential, right? And 65% of the unemployed workforce had secondary or higher levels of education, which means that most of the unemployed people are not just young, but also educated young. The irony of India is that there is a higher chance of being educated and unemployed. Because these days, an unskilled worker without primary education can pick up farm labor or join the informal sector. And the formal sector, the government jobs, organized privates, that creates around 5 to 6 million jobs a year. But the new entrance to the workforce is 7 to 8 million, adding to the backlog of already 37 million people who are unemployed young people. So the headline unemployment looks healthy at 4 to 5%, yes, but it masks a youth crisis. And besides this, India also has a hidden productivity crisis. But many are working in low income, low output roles that do not build long term wealth. Around 80 to 90% of jobs are informal. And this is exactly what China has solved 20 to 30 years back, which is shifting the farm workforce to industries to create more formal jobs, incentivize the companies to build. Which brings us to the next question, which is how employable are Indians? We often see that the skills or education that we have picked up from our degrees is now very, very different than what the job market really wants. It was common to see a headline like this 15 years back, and in the last few years, we have seen 7 IITs, 7 IIMs, and over 15 AIMS, and new 400 universities being set up. But we've also seen an increase in headlines like these. India has the highest number of STEM graduates in the world. Every year, 1.5 million engineers graduate from Indian colleges, but less than 20% of them find engineering jobs. The India Skill Report of 2025 says that over 50% of Indian graduates are now employable, up from 33%, which is a progress, by the way. But it also means that 50% of the graduates now are not job ready on day one. So, this mismatch is not just technical skills. According to the ILO Employment Report of 2024, 75% cannot send an email with an attachment. 60% people cannot copy and paste files, and 90% cannot even write a basic spreadsheet formula. And these are the basic skills that are needed in the organized sector today, which is why there is a deeper problem between what the educational system produces and what it demands. Hence, this shows the deeper problem with the educational sector, which is a video for another day. The formal vocational training, which is happening mainly in the cities and white collar jobs, reaches only 5% of the population. And that is a much smaller number compared to USA having 52% share and Japan with 80% and Korea with 96%. There is a structural mismatch between what the economy needs and what the workforce is trained to do. And as much as this looks like a gap, it is also an opportunity for us to build in this space. Another gap in the unemployment pipeline is the female labor force, the most untapped economic factor. It is commendable that we have gone from 23% female participation in 2017 to 41% in 2023. But surprisingly, the high jump comes from mainly rural India and not urban India. Our women are also more employable than men now. But 90% of employed women work in the informal sector. If India adds even 10% of its female labor force, then it adds $700 billion to its GDP. Closing the gender gap could increase the GDP by 27%. Not to compare with any other country, but to get an idea of how well unutilized youth bulge looks like. Let me take a step back. We are generally doing something right. We have over 2 lakh recognized startups. We have 127 unicorns, making us the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. We have built Aadhaar, UPI, and a digital infrastructure that the IMF and the World Bank asked other nations to copy. So we have something real. We have entrepreneurs, we have ideas and energy. But the question is, why is it that when we think about big Indian conglomerates, the only names that come to our minds are companies which were founded generations ago? In the beginning of its demographic window, China had over 80% of its population under poverty line. They created small rural manufacturing units that generated 100 million non-farm jobs in just 13 years, lifting a lot of people out of poverty. And during its years of demographic window from 1980s to 2015, it saw some major companies blow up like Huawei or BYD or Tencent or Alibaba. So by the time Alibaba and Tencent was founded, China had already spent 20 years building the infrastructure that made the scaling of Alibaba possible. And during South Korea's window, the government essentially placed industrial bets and backed them with state capital, directing all state controlled bank credit to specific industries, which led to Samsung. So, Samsung, that started as a noodle and sugar trading company in 1938, made its first semiconductor in 1984. Today, Samsung alone accounts for 22% of the country's GDP. Then comes Taiwan, which successfully created a direct pipeline between university research and industries. Taiwan's TSMC, which you must have heard about when it comes to semiconductors, it is a leader in that, is a byproduct of such policies in 1973. In 15 years, they built something no one had ever tried before, a semiconductor company that only manufactures chips. It forms 70% of the global semiconductor foundry market. And that is what happens when you deliberately connect academia and industry. Now, if we have to look into India's startup story, we have the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. Our PLI schemes have crossed 12 lakh jobs, and our ease of doing business rank has jumped up by 79 ranks in 6 years. But maybe we should also try to understand that, are we in the middle of a Samsung moment or a TSMC moment? And this ecosystem is mainly concentrated in 5 cities majorly, which is Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad, and Pune. And most of the growth is in services, digital, consumer tech, fintech, edtech. Our MSMEs employ over 110 million workers, roughly contributing 30% to our GDP and 45% to our exports. That sounds like an incredible asset, right? But our median firm size is just 18 workers, whereas for China, it is 134 workers. Our firms are choosing to stay small. So maybe half of our battle will be fought if we shift our focus to productivity quotient. You know, Indians produce output per hour, which is way below any other top economy. And that is not necessarily because we are not hard workers. We are very hard working people. We work long hours, often in difficult conditions, for relatively lower wages. But in this race against time, it is less about efforts and more about systems. Toyota didn't win global markets by having workers put in 16-hour workdays, right? It won by inventing the Toyota production system, which was just-in-time manufacturing system, like zero waste, continuous improvement, and the Kaizen philosophy. So every worker in Toyota factory is trained not just to do their own job, but also to improve the systems that they are operating in. So having a huge population should also mean having a lot more innovation, creating an environment to put them into use. And the question isn't whether India can do it. It will, of course. The question is whether we will do it fast enough. So finally, to conclude, if India can become rich before it gets old, we need to look at World Bank's classification of income. Lower income group, lower middle income, upper income, and then high income. The threshold to become a high income nation, we need to reach $13,000 per capita. Currently, we are at $3,000 per capita. We need to grow 4 times the current income level in the next 21 years to get there. In the 1960s, we actually started with $81, while China started with $89. Almost similar, right? But today, China and India have a gap of $11,000 per capita. The demographic dividend is not a guarantee. It never was. It is an opportunity that India needs to own this version and not a copy of Toyota or Alibaba. Our economy is different, our scale is different, our sectors are different, but the principle holds that you cannot rely on cheap labor forever. At some point, either wages rise and productivity needs to match, or you get trapped in a low value, low wage work that can never get you to high income. And that depends on the next 15 to 20 years more than any other period in modern Indian history. And it brings us to the only question that we started with. Is India passing the dividend test in the next 20 years? The answer is honestly not mine to give. It will be written by the policymakers, the factories built in the next decade, the girls who get to work in the next generation, and the researchers who stay in India instead of going abroad. So, the window is open. What happens next is entirely up to us. That is our story. That's it from my side. Thank you for watching, everyone. If this video made you think or argue with your screen, drop a comment below and we read everyone. Like, share and subscribe to Angel One Economics and see you in the next one.
Investments in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.